So
Yes,
I think we
absolutely.
can start, broadly discussing the various kinds of dogs that we have around. We have the
Mm-hmm.
regular, the in
Yeah.
dog that we see everywhere on the street, which varies slightly from north all the way down to south. And then we have the
Mm-hmm.
breeds that we see as partially recognized within the Kennel Club of India, which are seen at the dog shows. And then there are many who don't come to the dog shows, but kind of broadly recognized in India.
There are the Bakharwal, there's the Bakharwal, and then there's the Western Uttarakhand Mastiff, and then there's the Tibetan Mastiff and the Himalayan Sheepdog, and all of them can be put in one group for the sake of discussion.
Right.
But basically, as the name suggests, these are high altitude dogs domesticated by people who are generally, mobile.
Right.
So the shepherds in the mountains are not static.
Okay.
They move with the season.
Okay.
So they'll come to the foothills and then they'll go back into high into the mountains depending on the season.
Mm-hmm.
So the dogs that they keep are the Himalayan sheepdog, for example, or the Gaddi Kutta,
Mm-hmm.
are dogs that are living with these families
Okay.
and moving with them and
Okay.
moving with them and they are all of similar size. These three or four dogs, whether it's the Uttarakhand Mastiff or the Bakharwal. The
Okay.
Bakharwal is the Bakharwal is from the Pir Panjal range,
Okay.
again high altitude.
Okay.
So the similarities between the Tibetan Mastiff and the Himalayan Sheepdog, and these are generic similarities.
Right.
The type of coat,
Okay.
the tail carriage,
Okay.
the size,
Okay.
and all these dogs that you will classify as shepherds,
Mm-hmm.
they are very dependable. They are very loyal, but they
Okay.
are fierce. But they are fiercely loyal.
Okay.
Yes, and they are not dogs that would like to be, playing around with children or staying inside your living room, and they are basically aloof by nature.
Mm-hmm.
They like their space. They are aloof
Okay.
by nature. They'll be awake throughout the night.
Okay.
It comes as a basic instinct.
Yes. There is a
Now you'll
Bakarwal.
see.
We have
Now
the
you'll
Himalayan sheepdog.
Yeah. Now the
You know.
Bakarwal, the Himalayan sheepdog, and the Gaddi Kutta. If we take these three pictures, for example,
Right.
you'll find them of similar anatomy,
Right.
and its cousin
Mm-hmm.
of much larger size with a different head plane,
Okay.
different skull,
Okay.
but very similar in type. It's similar in coat, similar in tail.
Right.
Is the Tibetan
Tibetan
Mastiff.
Mastiff.
Now,
It- It's a
now
Tibetan
the
Mastiff
Tibetan
recognized by
Mastiff.
the FCI.
Oh yes, of course it is recognized by the FCI.
Right. So. Okay.
That though it's not Indian because it derives its name from Tibet, but it's very similar in feature.
Okay. Anyway, I think now we can move on from these breeds to one of the new breeds that we see around, which is the Bully Kutta, which has been gaining
Oh, the
popularity.
Bully Kutta.
Yeah, so the breed has been gaining popularity. I'm sorry, one second. I'm trying to figure. Yeah, it's been gaining popularity across a lot of people. People who kept Rottweilers and people who like the big dogs, the aggressive dogs. They've been wanting to get Bully Kuttas. Can we hear more about the origin of Bully Kuttas and how it's been evolving?
Uh, Forgive me for saying this, but amongst the many things that we are not grateful to Pakistan for, this is another one.
Yeah.
I mean that, it's a breed that has been bred, created by mixing different types of dogs,
Okay.
and so different, not only in size but in the entire anatomy, in the entire structure of their head, in the entire purpose for which they have been bred. What they have done is they have crossed breeds like the Staffordshire Terrier, the Bull Terrier, the Amstaff, the Great Dane, the English Mastiff, God knows what all.
Okay.
And the purpose has been solely to create a large animal which is subject to this very cruel game, dog fights.
Right.
If you Google the bully kutta, even Wikipedia will tell you that it's not safe for the owner as well as the other dogs.
Okay.
So I mean that how do you create a standard for an animal that you are breeding only to fight? What's the purpose? What's
Right.
the objective? When we judge a standard, we do form and function.
Right. And we also have these breeds like Kumaon Mastiff, which is lesser known, I would say. Have you come across many of them? And, what is what have you seen of them? The Kumaon Mastiff.
No, the Kumaon, I have come across the Kumaon Mastiff, and if you drive up into the hills in the Kumaon region, you still find them locally amongst the villagers.
Right.
And now look at this dog, Cherian, and put on a little coat on him. Put on the same color coat as his natural color is. Let it be red
Right.
or tan or rust or whatever you want to call the color.
Okay.
And you will find that other than the brindling which you find on this short coat,
Right.
it's again very similar to a HSD or a Gaddi Kutta.
Okay.
Even amongst the long-coated varieties like the Saint Bernard, you have the smooth-coated Saint Bernard.
Right.
So the Kumaon Mastiff, in terms of size, in terms of temperament, in terms of basic character and traits, is nothing but a shepherd.
Okay. A lot of people are familiar with seeing this when you hear Indian breeds, rather than the dogs that we discussed right now. So we have the Caravan Hound and the Pashmi, and we have the Mudhol Hound and the Kanni and the Chippiparai. Although a lot of them look very similar in appearance, can we go into details of what really distinguishes some of these breeds, especially Mudhol Hound and Caravan Hound? You don't see too much of differences recorded in many places or clearly written in many places.
I'll come to this question which you have raised, but before that, before we move from the mountains down into the plains of the Deccan or the South,
Yeah.
amongst the sight hounds,
Okay.
there is an Indian breed called the Rampur Hound.
Yes.
Do you have a picture of the Rampur Hound, Cherry?
I do have a picture. It's not the best picture that I could find, but
Now,
yeah.
yes. Now, Rampur is a small, it used to have a Nawab.
Right.
And it's a small district right at the beginning of the mountains. When you're going up from Bareilly towards Pantnagar and into the hills, you have this little small princely town called Rampur.
Okay.
And when we started showing dogs, Rampur hounds were still around.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, there were a lot of Rampur hounds. There were a lot of Rampur hounds in the 80s and in the early 90s. And then they sort of disappeared for 20 years.
Okay.
And the resurgence of the Indian breeds has now come from the south when we talk of the Caravan and the Mudhol.
Absolutely.
But in the 70s and 80s, the only sight hound that was known to Indian shows was the Rampur Hound.
Was a Rampur Hound. Okay.
Now, the Caravan has a narrow head, narrow
Mm-hmm.
skull,
Okay.
whereas the Mudhol has a larger head, a longer muzzle, and a broader skull.
Right. And the A shape that you meant, we were.
Primarily because of the difference in the size of the game that they hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So the first distinction you must draw between these two breeds is on the type of the head and the size of the head.
Right.
The Mudhol will have a broader skull and longer muzzle and larger head than the Caravan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to draw a parallel, 33 inches at the withers is the size of a Great Dane.
Right.
So the size is the most distinct difference between the Caravan and the Mudhol. The
Okay.
Mudhol being the largest of the Indian hounds.
Okay.
Now that
Yeah.
is an Azawakh. That Azawakh is an African breed.
Mm-hmm.
It's from areas like Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali and all those countries.
Right.
Now look at the weight on this dog.
Right.
This is the ideal weight for a sight hound.
Okay.
You zoom in and you'll see that the last three ribs, the last three vertebrae,
Right.
are visible.
Right.
The sight hound by no stretch of imagination can have even a pound of extra flesh or fat on him.
Okay.
Get a dog that is healthy,
Okay.
but no fat.
Okay.
And the three vertebrae must be visible. Not
Right.
all,
Right.
but it's good if three vertebrae are visible.
Okay. I think
there's no harm if the pelvic bone is visible.
Right. So if we move on to other breeds, like for example Kanni, and we have Chippiparai.
It is very interesting, the Kanni is something which is relatively new.
Okay.
Now the Kanni is nothing but an offshoot of the Chippiparai.
Okay.
The people from the south, particularly from Tamil Nadu, would understand, and perhaps you would also know this word. Kanni is nothing but a word.
Right.
It describes a color.
Okay.
So those which are black and tan
Okay.
are the Kannis.
Oh.
And those which are liver or plain tan are the Chippiparais. 99% of the Kanni and Chippiparai are absolutely the same. The only difference is now in the black and tans. I was fortunate to judge them about 10 months ago in down south, 200 kilometers off Coimbatore.
Right.
And there were 45 Kannis.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, there were 45 Kannis, but unfortunately, the size varied from 20 to 21 inches right up to 27 inches.
Okay.
So we still have to achieve consistency of size in the Kanni.
Mm-hmm.
But basic features, the structure, the anatomy, the temperament is very similar to a Chippiparai.
Okay. There is a question from one of our viewers, Rahul Dev Gupta, who's asked this question about the Lucy's law being implemented in India. Lucy's law essentially says.
I can't read the question. Can you read it for me?
I will read it for you. So what it says is that, Mr. Shharat, going beyond your defense of breeders, I have a query. How does one stamp out the breeders' cruel practices? One hears so many horror stories. Isn't a law needed on the line of the Lucy's law in England? Mr. Shharat, being an ex-civil servant as well as a dog fancier, may please comment. Thanks, RDG.
Oh yes, of course there's a law needed, and there's a law needed for every cruel practice. Why only the cruel practice of breeding?
Right.
There is a law needed. There is a law in place. If you read the latest laws which call for registration of your pets with the municipal corporations and the living spaces and the breeding standards that have to be put in place, Yes. My
So,
defense of breeders is not for indiscriminate breeders. My
absolutely,
defense of
absolutely. I
breeders
think
is
that's
for breeders who are responsible.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
I think
I'm
that's
not
something
saying
that
breed indiscriminately. I
right,
mean, and why only dogs? You should have responsible breeders in cattle and in goats and in poultry and in horses and in everything. Why only dogs?
right. So, thank you so much, Shharat. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and thank you so much, Shharat sir.
Thank you, everybody.